It's Adam here for PC Monitors, and in this video I'm going to be taking a look at the OSD on-screen display menu system of the BenQ EX2780Q. The OSD is controlled by two methods. There's some controls at the rear of the monitor towards the right side, and that includes a little joystick there, as well as a few pressable buttons. And there's also this remote, which I find a far easier way of navigating through the OSD system. Very intuitive. I'll go through both systems, just starting with the buttons first. The first two buttons are custom keys, so you can customize them in the OSD, and I'll go through that shortly. But if you press the first one, by default it allows you to adjust the input used by the monitor, and the second one allows you to change between one of three preset color modes very quickly. So they're the presets of the monitor, and I'll go through this in the main menu system when I get there. Next is the joystick itself, and if you push that in or twiddle it to the left, right, up or down, you get this little radial quick menu, so you can see what the joystick directions are going to do if you press them again. So there's X, which is exit. If you twiddle the joystick up now, you'll be able to quickly adjust the brightness of the monitor. If you twiddle it down, you can quickly adjust the contrast. And if you twiddle it right or push it in, you can access the main menu system. There's also a dedicated power button. It's a little power button to turn the monitor off, just under the joystick there. The OSD remote, that includes a power button there at the top left, a source select button. This is much like the joystick, up, down, left or right. There's OK, which does exactly what you'd expect. Lets you go deeper into the menu or select a certain feature. It's HDR-I, and this allows you to select one of the HDR settings. These are applicable if you've got the monitor running SDR or HDR. It says they're HDR emulated, so that's what happens if you're using SDR. Whereas if you're using HDR, they actually use a proper HDR signal. And I'll go through these when I get to them in the main menu system. There's also the button to get into the main menu system, or you can just press the OK button a couple of times and you'll get there as well. There's a BI+, Brightness Intelligence Plus shortcut key. That's disabled at the moment because of the preset I'm using, because of the color mode I'm using, but I'll go through this when I get to it in the main menu system. There's B, which is low blue light settings, so you can quickly select one of the low blue light settings. And again, I'll go through these in the main menu system when I get there. But this features a very nice way of activating and deactivating them very quickly. If you just push it once, it'll turn on the low blue light setting you had last selected, or turn it off if you've actually got the low blue light setting active, or you can select a different one from the list if you prefer. So it basically acts as a toggle, or it allows you to choose one of the other settings. So that's quite a nice feature, very easy way of activating, deactivating the low blue light settings. Next, there is an audio scenario button, so that allows you to adjust the equalizer to various presets for the speakers of the monitor, and I'll go through that when I get to it in the main menu system as well. There's a mute button, volume down and volume up as well, and there for the integrated speakers or anything connected to the 3.5mm jack if you're using that instead. There's also a little rocker wheel here which allows you to quickly adjust the volume, decrease it or increase it. So I'll now go through the main menu system. First up, there's input, and that allows you to select the input used by the monitor, DisplayPort, USB-C, HDMI 1 or HDMI 2, two different HDMI ports. They're both HDMI 2.0, the version number. There's picture, and that allows you to adjust the brightness used by the monitor, the contrast, the sharpness. You can set that between 0 and 10. Sorry, between 1 and 10. 5 is the default, and I find that just fine, but you can adjust that according to your preferences. There's advanced, and some of these are grayed out, and that's because it depends on the preset mode you're using. So I'll just change the color mode, which is the presets. And actually, you know what, since I'm here, I might as well go through the presets now, and I'll come back to the other settings once I get there. So there's low blue light. That's a low blue light feature, as you'd expect from the name. and that reduces the blue color channel strength and decreases the blue light output from the monitor. It also makes some other adjustments, and it's actually better balanced than many low blue light settings. So again, you can use the shortcut key on the remote if you prefer to look at these different settings, but multimedia is the weakest and reading is the strongest, or one of the strongest. So reading has the strongest effect, and I actually use this for my own viewing pleasure in the evenings, not for specific testing of the monitor, but just because it does create a nice relaxing image. It greatly reduces the blue light output from the monitor, and that is important as blue light is stimulating to the body and isn't something you want just before going to bed. So it helps you relax, unwind, and some people just find it just visually more relaxing. So that's what those are for. It does come at the expense of contrast, as explored in the written review, but this is a bit better balanced than some low blue light settings because the green colour channel is rebalanced as well, and so is the red, so it has a better look to the image. Sometimes low blue light settings make the image look like someone's urinated on the monitor or something, to put it quite unpolitely. You know, a very sort of yellowish green appearance to everything, but this is better balanced in that respect. There's also e-paper, and that is a low blue light setting that also makes everything black and white. Or should really say grayscale, because technically it is grayscale rather than just black and white, but you get the drift. No nice pretty colours. Next there's Rec 709, and this will give you a very dim image by default, although you can adjust the brightness with this setting, and it's actually an sRGB emulation setting, so it restricts the colour gamut as well. I'll give you more accurate output within the sRGB colour space, or following the Rec 709 standard. Next there's colour weakness, and this allows you to filter the monitor in such a way that it is easier for people to see various different shades if they have colour blindness, as we call it in the UK. I mean, we'll call different things depending on where you're based, but you know, if you have problems distinguishing red and green, for example, you can use this. And there is an associated setting in the eye care section of the OSD for this, and it allows you to customize how strong the red filter effect is, and also how strong the green filter effect is. So you can customize this according to what works best for you if you have a degree of color blindness. Obviously, I'm not talking about having completely monochromatic vision, because then this isn't going to help you. But you know, it can help you if you find it difficult to distinguish certain colors like red and green shades. Next there's MBook, and that's supposed to give you a representation of the image on the monitor which more closely resembles a MacBook. There's Standard, which is the factory default. Gamer 1, Gamer 2 and Gamer 3, can't say I much like these. They upset the image in various different ways, and I believe they give you slightly less flexibility than some of the presets. Could be wrong. No, they give you full flexibility, however No, they don't. They don't let you adjust the colour temperature settings, and you can't adjust the gamma either, and they tend to mess both of those things up. So I would suggest just making manual adjustments and avoiding using these. There's My Favourite User, which allows you to adjust a lot of things manually and gives you the nicest balance to the image. Or potentially the nicest balance to the image if you know what you're doing with the adjustments. So going back to the picture mode, advanced section, now you can see dynamic contrast is not grayed out anymore. This is explored in the written review. You can change that between 0, which is disabled, and 5. As usual, I don't really like dynamic contrast settings, so I'm not going to spend much time going through that. Next there's display mode, and you might not be able to see on the video, but there is full at the top, there's aspect, and there's 1:1. So full will use all pixels of the monitor. If you're running a non-native resolution, this means it'll use an interpolation process. And in fact, I'll just quickly switch the monitor over to the full HD resolution so I can show you these. That'll probably make more sense than just trying to explain them. So I'm running the full HD resolution now. You can see full and 1:1 is enabled. So full uses interpolation, uses the full screen space. There's 1:1, which is a 1:1 pixel mapping mode. You can see there's a big black border around the image. That's at the top and the left side as well, although you can't see it on the video. So that goes all the way around, and there's just a little section of the screen in the middle showing that resolution completely undistorted. There was also aspect, which was grayed out, and what that does is it's grayed out because this full HD resolution is 16 by 9, just like the native 2560 by 1440 resolution of the monitor. But if you were to select a resolution which is not 16 by 9, the aspect setting would respect the aspect ratio of your source resolution, but use interpolation to fill up the screen as much as possible aside from that. Next, in the picture section of the OSD, there is something called super resolution, and this is another sharpness filter. And I discussed this a little bit in the interpolation and upscaling section of the written review. This can be useful if you're running non-native resolutions in particular, but it just gives you a slightly different sharpness increase than just using the sharpness setting alone. And you can use these on top of one another, so they stack, so to speak, if you want a bit more fine-tuning over the sharpness. Next, there's smart focus, and this will just highlight a certain section of the screen, and you can customize the horizontal, vertical position, as well as how large exactly that box is in the middle of the screen, or to the left, right, up or down, depending on what you've selected with your V and H position. This is just to help you highlight a certain section of the screen if that's got some important information for you. You might be able to see some strange little dancing lines every now and then on this video, by the way. I should have really mentioned that before. That's just moire from the camera. It isn't from the monitor itself. It just happens if the monitor is a certain distance from the camera is displaying certain content. They can just come and go, but it's not something you'll observe on the monitor itself. Next, there's colour, and I've been through the colour modes already. There's HDR mode. So, as I mentioned, if you have the monitor running in SDR, these are emulation settings. The Game HDRI and Cinema HDRI settings, they combine the brightness intelligence plus functionality of the monitor. I'm not going to say much about that here because I don't like the feature, to be honest. Brightness intelligence plus, I talk about that in quite some detail in the review and link to another review where I've actually done some measurements and various specific assessment of that. And what it does is it uses the light sensor in the middle of the monitor, and it makes various adjustments to the image, including brightness, color, temperature, gamma, and possibly some other things related to what the ambient room lighting is. You don't have any say in this whatsoever as a user, and of course everyone has their own sensitivity to brightness and other preferences, so having this all changed based on your room lighting, it just seems to try and do too much, so I don't like that. And trying to couple that with HDR, that really doesn't make any sense in my book, because HDR is supposed to be a very specific set of parameters which is closely followed. Having it keep on changing them based on your room lighting and limiting your luminance if you're not in a very bright room just seems completely counterintuitive. So as I mentioned, I'm under SDR at the moment, so these are so-called HDR emulation settings. I hate that term, it makes no sense whatsoever. You can't emulate HDR, it's something you either use or don't use. And all these do is they upset the image by messing up the saturation levels, the gamma, they increase the sharpness, they give a sort of sharpness filter effect, and I really don't like them. You can actually adjust the sharpness, I should mention, so that's not necessarily a problem, the extra sharpness. You can adjust that yourself, but they just don't give an appealing look to the image. Some users might like how the image looks with these as it happens, but it really doesn't really appeal to me. If you're running the monitor under HDR, so I'll just switch it over to HDR, then these become actual HDR settings and the monitor is using a proper HDR signal. Of course, this is just a desktop, so that is an SDR environment anyway. However, the monitor has switched to its HDR operating mode now. You can see that you can't adjust things like the brightness or contrast yourself, and lots of these other options are grayed out as well. But you can adjust that HDR setting between Game HDRI, Cinema HDRI, and Display HDRI. These are all explored in the written review. And just to say quickly, I do prefer the Display HDR setting because it doesn't use that brightness intelligence plus malarkey. Next, there's black equalizer, but that is grayed out in various presets. So I'm going to have to change my color mode to, I believe standard will have this, so it is available or not. Interesting. Yeah, okay, so Gamer 1, Gamer 2 and Gamer 3 have it available. I was a bit surprised that Standard didn't have it available, to be honest. Seems a bit odd to me. Usually it is available with Standard. Yeah, so it's not available with anything other than Gamer 1, Gamer 2 and Gamer 3, it seems. which seems a bit restrictive to me. I'll just double check that it definitely isn't there with the user mode, because that does seem a bit odd. Yep, no, definitely grayed out. Okay, well, I just want to try and find a user mode which is least annoying. Gamer 3 perhaps, although really messes up the gamma. But anyway, black equalizer. This allows you to enhance the visibility of darker shades, and that'll give you a nice competitive edge in games. And it's quite flexible in terms of being able to adjust it between 0 and 20, and 0 being completely disabled. Slightly lighter, lighter again, you get the idea. So it's quite progressive, and unlike some features of this nature, it doesn't affect your black point, so it doesn't completely wash things out, and it doesn't affect the much brighter and more saturated shades. It really just focuses on the dark areas, so that's good. However, what isn't good is the fact that they have tied it down to these specific presets, which I don't really like using at all. So I think it's a well implemented feature, which would be more useful if you could actually use it with other settings. I don't personally like using that kind of thing anyway, so I'm not really too bothered. But I just think it's a waste to just tie it to a couple of the colour modes. Next there's colour vibrance, and that is a digital saturation enhancement. I'll change to a more colourful desktop background so you can see this more clearly. Yep, this nice colourful frog will do nicely. This is a digital saturation enhancement or adjustment feature, so 10 is the default. If you increase this, what it does is it pulls shades close to the edge of the colour gamut without adjusting the colour gamut itself, and that means that you lose shade variety and things are crushed together, but it does increase saturation overall. So some people like this look, I don't, and I certainly don't think it's necessary at all on a monitor like this with the natively wide colour gamut anyway. You might actually want to reduce this a little bit depending on your tastes, but what I would say is that I find that if you reduce this slightly to say 8, some shades appear far more muted than they should, and others appear too saturated, so it's very difficult to get the balance right by just adjusting this. It isn't the same as an sRGB emulation setting, which this monitor does include with the Rec 709 mode, so just be careful with these adjustments because they can upset the image in ways you may not necessarily realise. Although I suppose the argument could be made, if you're not realising what it's doing, then what's the problem? So if you like using it, use it. Next is colour temperature. User define allows you to adjust the red, green and blue colour channels manually. There's reddish, which gives you a slightly warmer than default colour tone, bluish, which gives you a significantly cooler colour tone than default, and normal, which is the factory defaults. Advanced, you can set the monitor to various different gamma settings, and these were spot on in terms of the measured central gamma on my unit, so they do correspond to what they should, so that was good to see. Reset colour, and that resets the colour menu to the factory default, so that's just this section of the menu system, so all of this stuff here. Next is AMA, Advanced Motion Acceleration. This is the pixel overdrive feature of the monitor, grey to grey acceleration, response time setting if you prefer, and you can set this to off, high or premium, and this is all explored in the review. RGB PC range, so you can set the signal type to limited range, full range, or automatically detect based on the colour signal detected or the system detected. So for PC users, and actually most users, I think auto detect would be a sensible default. It should really sort it out for you. Next there's audio. So there are various different audio scenarios, and these are just various equalizer settings. I explore these a bit in the written review. I actually quite like the balance with the default live/pop setting. I find that uses the subwoofer well, because this monitor does have an integrated subwoofer, which is really a main component of its sound system if you're using the integrated speakers. The game mode, I suppose, can be quite useful, but I don't find the directionality particularly good. I mean, it's just a stereo speaker set, and it isn't like a surround sound system or anything, and it's not as good as my headphones for directionality anyway. And the game setting kind of just sounds a bit anemic, really. It doesn't have enough bass, and the subwoofer is really the main part of this speaker system, in my opinion. So I prefer to use the live/pop. The rock/party one gives you a good bassiness as well. I'm not an audio reviewer, I'm a monitor reviewer, but these are just my preferences. You can also adjust the volume of the integrated speakers. I've shown you how you can do that with the controller and also that little scroll wheel thing to the left of the monitor as well. You can do it in the OSD itself if you prefer. You can mute the integrated speakers or anything connected to the 3.5mm jack. The volume control will also control that if you happen to be using the jack instead of the integrated speakers. Next there's eye care, and you'll see some of that is grayed out, and as you've probably guessed, that's because you can only activate some of these features with certain presets, which I agree gets quite tiresome. I wish they would just let you do everything with user mode, for example. So if I revert to standard, I can now use the BI Plus Brightness Intelligence Plus feature. I've already explained this with reference to HDRI before. I've also explained that I don't like the feature, so I'm not going to say much more about that. But if you do have it enabled, there is light meter, and this will give you a little on-screen indication of the relative brightness of your room according to the monitor and how bright the monitor is going to go with respect to that. You can change the sensitivity if you're finding it too reactive to brightness changes or not reactive enough, and you can change that between 0 and 100, with 100 being the most sensitive, 50 being the default sensitivity level. There's also adjust by duration, and this will make the monitor's color temperature get progressively warmer as you've been using the monitor for longer. I haven't actually tested this out because I prefer to set my color temperature based on the time of day myself rather than how long I've been using the monitor, and certainly, you know, using those low blue light settings in the evening. So this may have some utility, I'm not sure, I don't really use it myself. Eye reminder, that will give you a reminder on the screen after a given number of minutes have passed. Given time has elapsed as a nicer way of saying that, Adam. Between 30 and 60 minutes, or you can select 45 minutes in between there. And that's just a little nag, so I don't use that feature. Low blue light settings, I've already been through them. Color weakness, also been through them. Next there's custom key, and that allows you to change what the first button at the back of the monitor and the second button does when you press it. So by default it's input. If you prefer and you don't use a certain input and you just want to really toggle between two of the inputs, you can do that. So that can be quite useful. So say you had something connected by HDMI and another thing by DisplayPort, you can have it so it just toggles between those two. Color mode, you select 3 of these or up to 3 of these. So if you were to only say use the user setting and Rec 709, the sRGB emulation setting, you can do that. You can do the same kind of thing with the HDR modes and audio scenarios as well. So now if I push the top button, you can see that I can just select different inputs. I don't have anything connected to HDMI, that's why that was grayed out. And the second one there just very quickly cycles between the sRGB emulation mode and my preferred user settings. So that's potentially quite useful. Next, the system. OSD settings, you can change the language, how long the OSD stays on the screen before automatically disappearing after the last button press, or you can just exit it manually by various different methods. OSD lock, which I've just activated without even thinking about it. I hope I can work out how to unlock it. So now if you press anything, it says OSD locked. And I often get people saying my OSD is locked in my video comments and trying to work out how to do it. Please don't ask me about this because, you know, I'm not a source of all knowledge, and almost always the manual for a particular monitor will tell you how to unlock the OSD. But in this case, I'm going to guess you hold down the menu button for a certain amount of time. So I'm just pressing the menu button here. That didn't work. So I'm getting a bit nervous now. So if I hold down OK for, I don't know, 10 seconds. Still says OSD locked. Okay, so maybe I have to... Oh, it tells you, okay, so when you actually push the joystick, I was just using the remote here, it says press and hold any key for 5 seconds to unlock OSD. Though I was doing that with the remote and it didn't do anything, so to unlock the OSD you have to hold something at the back of the monitor, presumably not the power button, and there you go, it says OSD unlocked. Now, where was I? DDC/CI is part of the plug and play functionality of the monitor. It allows you to use software to control it. Input auto switch, so you can have the monitor select the input for you. Or if you prefer to manually select it, you can have this off. Next there's auto power off, and what this will do is once the signal is lost to the monitor, so you've turned your PC or your system off and it goes into its low power state, the little power LED there, which I forgot to mention earlier, just have a little power LED just at the bottom there. It glows white when the monitor is on, but if it enters the low power state, it glows amber instead. With this feature active, it will turn off after a given amount of time has elapsed. And that is to say, as if you've pressed the power button to turn the monitor off. There's LED indicator, so if you don't like that little power LED there, you can turn it off instead. I don't really mind it, I just leave it on, just out of habit. Resolution notice, so you can have the monitor remind you if you're not running the native resolution. So if you've got it set to full HD, it'll remind you that 2560 by 1440 is the native resolution. Next is information that shows you the input used by the monitor, the resolution and refresh rate. And the refresh rate there will change according to your frame rate if you're within the variable refresh rate window of the monitor and you're also using adaptive sync. It only reflects what that was when you first entered the information section of the menu there. It doesn't update in real time. And it shows you the optimum resolution, so that's just the native 2560 by 1440 at 144 Hz. Tells you whether HDR is on or off. And it shows you the model name, which is EX2780Q. And there's an option to reset everything to the factory defaults. With that said, that is all there is to the OSD on-screen display menu system of the BenQ EX2780Q. Be sure to check out the full review on PCmonitors.info. There's a link to that in the description of the video, alongside information about how you can support the work that we do.